Are you ready to look at the greatest achievements and most disastrous failures in hip hop this year? Because today we are counting down the 10 best and 5 worst albums of 2023. Now, after a year in rap music, which was considered to be one of the most tumultuous in the genre's entire history, we are finally gonna see if all the pain was worth it as we look at both the greatest gifts that have been put into the hip hop worlds, but also the most wretched pieces of trash that have cursed our ears. In a year filled with blockbuster albums and unprecedented artistic leaps, but also label greed, artist exploitation, and creative bankruptcy, today we are gonna find out if 2023 will be a year remembered for its greatest bodies of work or its most disgusting atrocities. Now, with all that out of the way, I don't think we need to waste any more time, so sit back, relax, and without further ado, let's get right into it. Now, kicking off this list with the best albums for a change, I have a record that surprisingly snuck onto this list with Drake's Scary Hours 3, and let me be very clear about this. I am not talking about the full Scary Hours Deluxe edition of For All the Dogs, because any version of a record that has the 23-song, uninspired, inconsistent mess of For All the Dogs belongs nowhere near a best album of the year list, but what I am talking about are simply the 6 new songs Drake released to finish off his Scary Hours trilogy in staggering fashion. Now, with just 6 tracks, Drake was able to make not just one of the best records this year, but his best body of work in nearly a decade, as between the short tracklist size and the focus on delivering quality music with substance instead of inflating albums to dominate the charts and algorithms, it allowed for Drake to do something that he has been avoiding for quite some time, which is, of course, to be an actual artist and not a brand. From the production choices, which features Drake rapping over smooth instrumental palettes from the likes of The Alchemist and Conductor Williams, to Drake's focus on the lyrical arts, this record is pretty much just Drake acting like a Griselda member or an underground rapper, and it thrives because of it. Drake's sneak disses and memorable punchlines fit seamlessly into the tense minimalist instrumentals of tracks like Red Button or Stories About My Brother, and aside from the typical braggadocious bag we have seen from Drake time and time again, he gets surprisingly introspective on this record as well. From the track The Shoe Fits, which features 6 minutes of vivid storytelling from Drake, to Wickman, which showcases how Drake has struggled to deal with grief and loss. Despite being just 6 tracks, this record offers more substance than nearly all of Drake's projects post-2015 combined. We also get another Drake and J. Cole collab on this record with the track Evil Ways, and where their other collab First-Person Shooter was amazing for being a grandiose spectacle, this track thrives from seeing Cole and Drizzy spar with one another lyrically, and for all of these reasons, for giving us back a version of Drake where he prioritizes quality over quantity, Scary Hours 3 has made it onto this list. Now, before we look at the 5 worst records of 2023, before we can get into the actual list, while I was originally gonna put the 10 worst albums of 2023 in this video, as I was finishing up this god-awful list, I realized one glaring problem. A lot of the albums fighting to be amongst the very worst in hip-hop were all here for the exact same reasons, which all just reflect the larger problems in the genre right now. From insane monstrosity-sized track lists to a lack of effort to the point where it sounds like artists were straight up trying to fail. If I would have included all my picks for the worst records of the year in this video, it would have gotten very repetitive very quick, so when it comes to these 5 worst albums that still remain, these are all here for even more hard reasons than you could imagine, so brace yourselves, because at number 5, we got Coi Leray with her album Coi. Now, when it comes to this piece of steaming hot garbage, while there are worse albums that dropped this year, as you will unfortunately find out, I don't know if there's a record that represents the biggest problem in hip-hop more than this. Now, after being backed by the music industry with a massive marketing campaign that got her major collabs with A-list stars and got her on the biggest stages during award shows and major events this year, Coi Leray was being propped up by the music industry as an artist ready to take over the rap world, but despite the smoke and mirrors they put up to make you think this, Coi's foundation was never actually laid out or developed, so despite all of the buzz they were making inorganically, when this album dropped, it only sold 9,000 copies first week, and while an album is not defined by what it sells, in this case, it makes complete and utter sense why this thing bombed, because this album is truly bottom tier hip-hop in the worst ways possible. Now, just like Coi Leray's entire career to this point, this album is built to deceive you into liking it, and while it tries to dangle samples and interpolations from other songs people actually like to make you think this, it just fails miserably. Nearly every single song on this album relies on sample bait, and if you don't believe me, I will go through the track list right now. The intro track samples Rich Girl by Hall & Oates, the second track Bop samples Sexy Back by Justin Timberlake, the third song samples Pump Up the Jam, Players samples The Message, My Body samples My Party, Get Loud samples Let's Get Loud, F It samples Daft Punk's Technologic, and it only gets worse the further down the track list you go. Now just from this alone, you can see everything you need to know about this album. Even while using so many known samples, Koi's generic and redundant songwriting puts the use of even the most iconic flips to sheer and utter waste. This album offers quite actually nothing of value, as its only selling point is reminding you of things that you already like with nothing else to support it. There's nothing inherently interesting about Coi Leray's performance, as she has just about as much charisma as an AI, and although she has become the poster child for the most creatively bankrupt music out there, I don't think it's her fault as much as it's a result of the industry that's been calculating every single move of her career and in hand destined this album to be a sheer and utter musical failure from the start. The reason I say this is because she delivered a phenomenal performance on Metro Boomin's track Self Love from the Spider-Verse soundtrack, so I really don't think it's a talent problem as much as it's the industry making her artistic decisions for her, and this is why this album fails. So overall, when an album is made by committee like this, it's destined to fail as it loses any chance it has to actually connect with listeners, and for Coi being a sludge down mess filled with superficial performances and sample baiting, this is why the album is ultimately one of the worst of the entire year. Now going forward from here, we will be looking at 2 albums from the best side of things followed by 1 from the worst until we reach the very end of this list, and at number 9 for the best albums of 2023, we got Nas's Magic 3. Now with an album that has concluded a run from Nas that has given us 6 albums since 2020, the expectations were definitely high for the finale, but as Nas has showed us time and time again with this run, we should never count him out because he will always find a way to defeat Father Time and impress us. Now with this being Nas and Hit Boy's 6th album in a little over 3 years, their chemistry has never been stronger, so when it came to crafting this grand finale, they managed to give us a record that embodied the very best of what they've been able to achieve. Between Hit Boy's soulful score and Nas's performance, which feels like his most personal and rounded in this entire saga of albums that he's released this decade, the moment these two create here is amongst the very best of their acclaimed run. Nas delivers a highlight reel performance showing off everything in his bag, from his intricate storytelling to the wisdom only somebody like him is able to give. Now while being in the rap game for over 30 years would make you think that Nas has nothing left to talk about, he raps about so many unique experiences that he's dealt with here, and more importantly, finds new ways to present these stories as he digs deep into his lyrical bag of tricks. We also get the first ever collab here between Nas and Lil Wayne with the track Never Die, and hearing these two spar out over a soulful boom bap beat is one of the greatest gifts hip hop has given us in its 50th year. So when it comes to Magic 3, while earlier albums in this series showed us a version of Nas where he was rapping like he had something to prove, what makes this record different is that Nas is rapping from a place where he has never been more comfortable, not just compared to his recent albums, but in his entire career. Nas sits on a throne throughout this entire project where he understands how he's transcended rap in ways nobody else has before him, but despite all of this, his success has only channeled him to go harder and find new ways to be great, and this is what makes this album so inspiring. For years to come, what Nas did on this very album and during this entire run will be studied as the gold standard for how a rapper should age, and rightfully so. So all in all, for Magic 3 being the perfect curtain call for the modern golden age of Nas music that we have been lucky enough to receive, it is number 9 on this list. Now coming in at number 8, we got one of the most highly anticipated collab albums of the entire year with Voir Dire by Earl Sweatshirt and The Alchemist, and when it comes to the face of abstract hip-hop and the hardest working producer in the game teaming up, they excelled in this collab for the ages. Now with a duo like Earl Sweatshirt and The Alchemist, with these two releasing tracks together since Earl's debut album Doris in 2013, we already knew the unrivaled chemistry they had together, so when it comes to this project, the question wasn't if this record would be great, but it was how they would go about it. Now after a run of solo albums for Earl Sweatshirt that explored his journey towards inner peace and self-healing, this album's a really nice change of pace as we just see Earl get in his bag and rap for sport, and on Uncle Al's side of things, he compliments him just as well as you would expect. Earl Sweatshirt once again proves he's one of the greatest lyricists in hip-hop right now with some of the most creative rhyme schemes and punchlines, and The Alchemist delivers a score perfectly fitted to Earl's elusive demeanor and tightly woven verses. Now with these two hitting on all cylinders, there are so many special tracks on this album that blow your mind due to the pen game of Earl, but touch your soul because of the chopped up up sample loops courtesy of Uncle Al. So overall, if you're looking for purely great beats and bars that channel the very spirit and essence of what hip-hop is all about, you will not find a better record that dropped this year than this. Now back to the worst albums of 2023. At number 4, we got NLE Choppa's project Cottonwood 2, and not the regular standard version of this thing, but the sped up version. And I'm sure you're wondering, is this even a real thing? And the answer is yes. Yes, it is. Now, we have seen artists have their popular songs released into sped up versions as they trend on TikTok before, but to release 22 songs worth of music all in this fashion right alongside the standard release of your album really echoes the larger problem with how this entire record was made. Cottonwood 2 was never intended to be a musical experience that relied on any sort of merit. Even for NLE Choppa's low standards, this album is a departure from the things that made him blow up in the first place, as he spends most of this record trying to make viral moments instead of making actual genuine music. Regardless of the songs being sped up versions, every track here is so brief, doing the absolute bare minimum to quantify as a song before moving on to the next one. Performances don't last more than a few lines, and even for NLE Choppa, it feels like his songwriting is intended to fit into 7-second clips and short increments as opposed to making actual coherent verses. It's a shame because even decent features from the likes of Lil Wayne and Rick Ross are just wasted to make these weird twerk bait cuts, and while it's one thing to make a record and have it spawn viral trends organically, when you design an entire project to do this, it destroys any chance it has at actually resonating with real humans. And the funniest part is, this is pretty much what happened, as really none of these tracks ended up going viral. So overall, while a lot of albums this year failed for having way too many songs with few of them being good, or for just releasing material that was so generic and contrived that nobody resonated with it, to release an entire album with the inherent design of it to gain virality on TikTok, it's one of the most pathetic and desperate moves I have ever seen any artist make. So for all of these reasons, Cottonwood 2 sped up is now immortalized as a musical monstrosity that will probably one day be looked at as one of the biggest reasons why NLE Choppa doesn't have a career anymore. Now back to the better half of this list. At number 7, we got Quaranta by Danny Brown. Now, with a rapper as one of one as Danny Brown, while he is known for his eccentric personality and loud creativity, his latest body of work takes a daring turn that many other rappers are too scared to even entertain. Now, as hip-hop is now 50 years old, one of the most interesting things we are seeing as the genre progresses is how rappers are accepting their own age and maturity, and while some continue to keep doing the same thing over and over again, as Danny Brown enters his 40s, he spends this album coming to terms with his age and what this means for not just his place in hip-hop, but for his life as a whole. Now, the way Danny goes about depicting this to listeners makes for one of the most compelling performances I have seen on an album in quite some time, as his fragile vocals and reflective writing make it feel like you are living with his inner thoughts. Now, with this album serving as a sequel to Danny's breakout record XXX, where this 2011 cult classic focused on showing us the crazed rockstar lifestyle Danny Brown was living as an up-and-coming rapper, Quaranta focuses on the end of Danny's journey in the limelight as he prepares to move on from this chapter of his life. The Detroit native is able to convey this idea of aging and letting go by focusing so much on the concept of time and the passing of it. From rapping about how much his hometown neighborhood has changed since he lived there, to even looking at how different the rap game is since joining it. The perspective Danny is looking back on with is all done to show how fragile memories are, and more importantly, to show the importance of holding on to moments while we are in them, as we will never get them back. There's so much complexity in the way Danny looks at all of this, as even with such things as making it as a rapper, while Danny acknowledges that hip-hop has changed his life for the better and put food on the table, he also realizes how being in the limelight for so long has destroyed parts of his humanity in ways he can never get back. Now, with albums that are meant to serve as the finale to an era, while they often end with moments that show us our favorite artist riding off into the sunset, with Quaranta, we never get this romanticized ending, and instead, it ends really with Danny Brown walking away into darkness. After looking back on his life and his career to this point, Danny doesn't know where he's gonna go from here, so in the most fitting finale possible for him, he leaves things in a manner where we don't know what is going to happen next, and despite this uncertainty and bleakness, it's one of the most satisfying conclusions I have seen to the last decade and a half of any rapper's career. So for Quaranta being an album that, if it was the last record ever released from Danny, you couldn't have asked for a better finale due to it being such a powerful body of work that masterfully portrays what it means to mature and grow, while also showing the mere importance of understanding the invaluable stable currency of time, it's number 7 on this list. Now, coming in as the 6th best album of 2023 and one of my personal favorites, we got The Great Escape by Larry June and The Alchemist, and when we look at this project, there is not a single album in hip-hop history quite like it. Now, while on the surface, you may think The Great Escape is just a standard luxury rap album, it's so much more than that in the best way possible. Now, while still feeling so pristine and high-end due to The Alchemist's elegant production and Larry June's lyrics about the lavish life he's living now, the purpose of The Great Escape is not to flex on listeners about how rich or powerful the artists making it are, but it serves to help listeners reach a better place in their own life. This is spearheaded by Larry June, who gives one of the best performances in modern hip-hop, all conveyed through his smooth demeanor and insightful lyrics. On this album, Larry June talks about such things as financial literacy and self-worth, but never does it in a way where it feels too preachy or vibe-killing. I've said this before, but Larry June is like the cool uncle of the hip-hop world with how he's able to balance his important subject matter and calm demeanor in a way that only enhance each other. Now, alongside this amazing performance from Larry, The Alchemist delivers one of the best production jobs of his entire 2020s album run, and this really says a lot. The vibrant soundscape Uncle Al puts together really makes this album feel like the musical embodiment of a cool summer breeze on a hot day, and this, alongside the tame swagger of Larry June, will make you feel cool, calm, and collected even on the most stressful of days in your life. Now, if you thought this album couldn't get any better, features from the likes of Joey Badass, Action Bronson, Big Sean, Boldy James, Wiz Khalifa, Ty Dolla $ign, and many others add performances that only further entrance you within the immaculate vibes this record was already given off. So overall, for contributing something to the rap world that is so valuable to listeners, The Great Escape is one of the best albums of the year. Now, as we get to the bottom 3 albums of 2023, we got another pathetic sequel album with NBA YoungBoy's Decided To, and with a rapper like YoungBoy, while I have been harsh on him in the past, I want to get something straight before I tear this thing to shreds. In theory, I don't think YoungBoy is a rapper who is completely talentless, as some of his earlier records were pretty solid, and we have seen him deliver some incredible features on tracks like Tyler the Creator's What's Your Name, but when it comes to the slate of projects that he has been pumping and dumping on us recently, this latest record from him reaches a new level of rock bottom. Now, when it comes to Decided To, this isn't just an album that is bad or lazy, but it feels like a record that was made out of force to meet a quota. Pretty much, this album feels like the musical equivalent to when you have a paper due in the morning that you procrastinate from writing until the night before it's due with how much thought is put into it. Every instrumental on this thing feels like it was selected by searching up NBA YoungBoy type beat on YouTube and scrolling down to the very bottom until you find the most rudimentary beats possible, and whatever is coming out of YoungBoy's own mouth feels like it's being said simply to fill up time and give you a headache with how painful his screechy delivery gets, and this is why this album sucks. There is not a single project in rap right now that represents this loss of purpose and meaning more than Decided To, and when an album has no reason to exist other than to make some money, what was once art becomes a cheap trick. This album is so pointless that I think I'd go as far to say that it's YoungBoy's worst, and I got really nothing else to say besides that. I am tired of hearing filler aimless trash like Decided To. Now, before we have to suffer through the 2 worst albums of 2023, we are back to the best albums, and at number 5, we got Let's Start Here by Lil Yachty, and wow. It's absolutely surreal that Lil Yachty has reached a point creatively where he has transformed his career from being the poster child of everything wrong in hip-hop to becoming a true artist who has taken some of the most creative risks of any rapper out right now, and when it comes to this album, by allowing himself to evolve creatively with no bounds, Yachty made a record that we are never going to stop talking about. Now, as soon as I heard the intro track to this project, The Black Seminole, which was also on my best songs list of 2023, I was absolutely blown away by every minute detail that Yachty put into this body of work. Through 14 tracks that take us through this otherworldly psychedelic trip, we are strapped into a ride that completely redefines just how creative music can get. Lil Yachty steps into the artistic role that, in hindsight, seems like he was always destined to play, as his signature charisma and charm bend into this rock-influenced musical universe to immerse us into something that will have you floating into another dimension. The structure of each song is so intricate, with no moment being quite like the last, and it's this unpredictability that keeps you on the edge of your seat throughout the entire project, but ultimately, it's the joy and positivity positivity Yachty ingrains into this album's very DNA that keeps you coming back to it. Now, one of the most infatuating parts about this album are the faint moments throughout it, like the track Failure, where we just hear Yachty talking, letting his bottled up thoughts about his darkest emotions loose, and in turn, he shows us the healing power that putting your heart into something you love brings. In this regard, the album becomes even more beautiful because Yachty's emotions are synced so deep into this thing that each twist it takes makes you all the more engaged in the final product. So overall, for being one of the most thrilling musical experiences I have heard all decade, while also showcasing just how important it is for artists to take risks and create based on their own desires and not business decisions, let's start here is cracking the top 5 of this list. And cracking the top 4, we got Tyler the Creator's Call Me If You Get Lost B-side record, The Estate Sale, and despite this record being just a 9-track send-off to the Call Me If You Get Lost era of Tyler's career, it managed to stand on its own as a great project filled with an array of Tyler's best tracks ever. Each song on this project shows us a side to Tyler the Creator that just fleshes out his artistic arsenal in a way that only further solidifies how elite of a rapper he's become. From the in-your-face, braggadocious Vince Staples collab Stuntman, which features the pair showing their hip-hop peers how to properly flaunt the wealth and success they love to boast about, to the infectious Dogtooth, Tyler excels here by letting the persona that made Call Me If You Get Lost so beloved just go in any direction he wanted to. Now, another aspect that made this record so special was that for the first time in Tyler's career since his debut album, he welcomed production from outside guests, and not just any producers, but arguably the two greatest of all time in Kanye West and Madlib, and this leads to two of the most special tracks of his entire career with Heaven to Me and What a Day. Hearing Tyler lay down some of his most compelling and well-written lyrical performances over the godly loops of two producers who we only ever dreamed of hearing him team up with makes for some of the best moments we have seen in all of hip-hop this year, and this record does not stop getting better from here. Now, while seeing Tyler collab with YG and A$AP Rocky made this album even more exciting, it's the final track, Sorry Not Sorry, which makes this record climb as high as it has. Now, this is another track that I have already praised in my best songs video, so I'm not going to say too much about it, but with this track being the defining moment not just of the Call Me If You Get Lost era, but of Tyler's entire career to this point, it adds such a strong sense of purpose to this entire project as it marks the end of Tyler's days designing albums with alternate egos and personas, and welcomes us to this next chapter of his career, which will presumably be his most personal yet. So overall, for The Estate Sale being a masterful showcase of one of the best rappers in the world's one-of-one skill set, along with preparing us for what's to come next for Tyler through its career-defining performances, it's number 4 on this list. Now, just as lucky as we were to look at those amazing albums, we are now in wretched territory as we are at the second worst album of 2023, and at number 2, we got Lil Pump's Lil Pump 2, and wow. Now, I have expressed my disdain for this album, especially after calling the track off of it with NBA Youngboy Don't Mind one of the worst songs of 2023, but with this entire LP, what makes it so bad is that we are watching a rapper's career take its final breaths, all while the rapper himself, who should be fighting for dear life, does not care one bit about how imminent his demise is. Now, with somebody like Lil Pump, we all knew the virality of his brain-dead music was always more of a meme and a moment than something that would stick, but by trying to recapture the exact same thing that made him a phenomenon 6 years ago, just without any of the context that made it go viral in the first place, Lil Pump doesn't just fail because he has about as much musical talent as a Big Mac, but because he fails to connect with any audience on a fundamental level. From start to finish, there is not a single song on this album that I can even say makes an admirable attempt at trying to do something good. In a setting where Lil Pump's back's against the wall and he should be fighting to save his career and any sort of relevance he can retain, he just sinks it further in the dump as his performance is as hollow-ringing as ever. This guy raps about the most generic things possible with the most rudimentary bars even for his standards, and making all of this even worse, these songs sound so dated and feel like they were left in the vault in 2018. Now, if Lil Pump was able to adapt his sound to reflect the times just a little, there was a chance that he could buy himself some more time in the rap world, but as this album stands, it feels like a collection of throwaways that didn't make his self-titled project or Harvard Dropout, and a collection of Lil Pump throwaways is something I don't think anybody even wants to think about. Now, I really don't know what else to say about this album besides that it's not just one of the worst of 2023, but really it's one of the worst rap albums ever released in hip-hop's 50 years. That's not an understatement. Now, with an album this bad only managing to be the second worst of the year, if I were you, I would get scared to see what album managed to somehow be even worse than it. And at the top 3 for the best albums, we got JPEG Mafia and Danny Brown's collab record, Scaring the Hoes, and this album really will scare away the hoes with how insane and zany it is, and that's what makes it so great. Having two of the greatest experimental hip-hop artists of all time come together ended up being a match made in hip-hop heaven, as Danny and Peggy made a project that embodies sheer and utter musical chaos. There is truly not a dull moment on this record, as the explosive score done by JPEG Mafia makes this record sound like a real trip, and the way the humorous demeanor of Danny plays off the aggression of Peggy makes for one of the best 1-2 punches I have seen in a collab album, period. It's an absolute gift that we got to see these two rappers doing exactly what they do best alongside one another, because by combining their forces, Danny and Peggy are able to not just go against the status quo like they usually do, but destroy it in plain sight, making an album that truly lives up to its namesake and more. There's so many moments on this LP that will really have you sitting there wondering how they pulled off such an insane musical spectacle. From corrupting soul samples to flip them into these distorted and loaded instrumentals to pulsing beat drops, the level of thought Danny and Peggy put into every single detail of this album will leave you blown away. So in a year in hip-hop where more people than ever have complained about the stagnant state so much of everything is in, and even with the worst albums we have looked at on this list, with the staleness and loss of purpose that has been dooming release after release, this album is the perfect foil to all of that, because it represents just how insane of a creation rappers can make when they are not worried about going viral on TikTok or recapturing some clout. So for all of these reasons, for being the antithesis of everything wrong in hip-hop and being an amazing experimental album, Scaring the Hoes is a top 3 album of this year. And coming in as the runner-up for album of the year, we got a project that, while I think it's not the very best of this year, I'd go as far to call it the ultimate rap album of the year with Killer Mike's Michael. Now, with an album like Michael, in a year where hip-hop has turned 50 years old, it's amazing that we were able to get a project that embodied so much of what has defined rap's lineage at such a high level. Through 14 tracks, Killer Mike drops arguably the best album he ever has in his over 20-year career, as he delivers an experience filled to the brim with everything that makes a quintessential hip-hop album. From the captivating stories Mike paints details from all corners of his life to depict, to the soulful production which makes the stakes of this album feel so high and angelic. The aura around this entire album commands a level of respect that most music can only wish to ever achieve. Killer Mike delivers so many jaw-dropping performances here that don't just put his generational lyrical and storytelling abilities on the forefront, but highlight his full artistic arsenal, as his emotionality is so visceral and poignant. You can hear the terror in his voice on a track, yet you can also hear the passion and fire just flowing out of him. It's this way Mike is able to detail his already intricate lyrical canvases with so much emotion and power with his deliveries and different flows that makes this album so dynamic and nuanced. There's so many tracks on this album that just capture the fire that has sparked hip-hop into becoming the global movement it is today, and this is something I can't say I have heard anywhere else this year. From the resilient and defiant Run with Young Thug and Dave Chappelle to Don't Let the Devil with his Run the Jewels co-star LP, there are countless moments on this album that will have you emotional purely because of how tightly they are able to grip on your heart. Now, speaking of features, bringing this album full circle and heightening the stakes of it all the more, 13 of its 14 songs have featured guests, and despite this number seeming overwhelming, it ends up only making the experience better, as each featured guest plays off Mike masterfully to make both the themes on the album and its spectacle even greater. The fact that superstars and hip-hop staples like Andre 3000, Future, 2 Chainz, Currency, Ty Dolla $, and many others are able to deliver some of the best features of the entire year alongside Mike is a sentiment to how he's able to use collaborators to make the best experience possible. So overall, for Michael being a must-listen to hip-hop experience that truly embodies everything that has made rap music the life-changing art form it has been for 50 years now, it's the second best album of 2023. And now, it's time for the worst album of 2023, the moment you have all been waiting for, and if you saw my best and worst albums list video at the halfway point of the year, you would know that I gave this title not to an artist, but a corporation with the Burger King You Rule jingles for being a straight up whack compilation of Burger King ads that took away hundreds of thousands of streams from actual deserving artists. But as I scoured through the worst albums that have dropped since then, I realized that a dude singing about a Whopper is actually pretty damn decent compared to what you're about to see. Now, this album is so bad that, in all honesty, it makes all the previous records we have looked at seem comparingly pretty good, and in all honesty, I am sick of talking about this horrible, horrible rapper, but once again, at the bottom of my list for the worst album of 2023, we got our guy Tom MacDonald with his collab album with Adam Calhoun, The Brave 2. Now at this point, it seems like Tom MacDonald is immortalized at being the king of bottom tier music, and I can't take it anymore. I can't stand listening to this guy's music and absolutely hating it. Now for those who don't know, Tom MacDonald is a lyrical miracle rapper who claims that he is the Eminem of our generation, but doesn't get the flowers for being so because he's a defiant rebel who only speaks the truth about how crazy the world we live in is.
What?
So pretty much this guy thinks he's like the Batman of hip-hop and the world, I guess, if you listen to his music, and in actuality, he's more like the Joker, and I'm not talking about the good ones, I'm talking about the Jared Leto one. Now with The Brave 2, he's teaming back up with his buddy Adam Calhoun, who is a country rapper, and this combination, running it back on listeners, ends up making for one of the most disastrous musical products I have ever heard. Somehow, this thing is worse than the original record. Pretty much everything you can like about music as an art form, it just goes in the opposite direction here. These two just complain about every single thing that they don't like in society for the entirety of the track list while never finding any sort of solutions or ways to cope with all of the problems that they're bringing up. With this all done with the musical prowess of a bear trying to play the piano, this album just makes your stomach turn and your head pound with how annoying and in your face these two get about everything. Now making this album even worse, other corny rappers like Dax join them, and somehow these two managed to get a feature from the legendary Project Pat, and I don't know why Project Pat would ever agree to hop on such a cringy song, as this is now a massive stain that he's put on his Hall of Fame resume. I mean, just when you thought a Tom MacDonald album couldn't get any worse, he had to involve Project Pat. But overall, for doing everything wrong and being the textbook definition of cringe lyrical miracle rap, The Brave 2 is your worst album of 2023. And finally, at number 1 for my 2023 album of the year, we got a record that didn't just live up to the hype, but exceeded my expectations with Travis Scott's Utopia. Now when it comes to Utopia, from start to finish, this 19-track epic is a marvel like nothing else in rap music. Now, in the current era of hip-hop, we are living in an age that is becoming increasingly dominated by the blockbuster album, with the biggest rappers in the world hyping up their upcoming albums for long periods of time and then dropping them with massive, unforgettable rollouts. The biggest album releases have become gigantic cultural moments, and while some have all the spectacle without any of the musical spine to back it up, Utopia is an LP that has already cemented its place as one of the defining records of the 2020s, and I'd go as far to call it modern hip-hop's perfect blockbuster album. Now, after becoming a bona fide global superstar on his last album, Astroworld, Travis Scott took things back to his roots here as he encompassed the grit of his earlier projects while still managing to make this entire experience feel so larger than life. As soon as you hear those chilling intro vocals and the raw instrumental on the album's intro track, Hyena, you see Travis simultaneously encompass all aspects of his artistry, and by clashing all of these musical components together, he goes on to deliver a career-defining performance. Now, while listening to Astroworld felt like a theme park ride, Utopia feels like you are entering into a new world with how ethereal it gets. There are so many moments on this album that sound like nothing else we have ever heard before, with how they manage to embody emotion, euphoria, spectacle, and of course, the rage. From the climactic beat switches of tracks like Thank God and Schizo to the infectious intensity of cuts like Modern Jam and Fiend, everything Travis Scott does on this record, from his insane vocal performances to his thrilling production, which is his most hands-on in nearly a decade, shows us that he has never been more in tune with his full creative scope than on this record. Now, when it comes to delivering the perfect blockbuster album, one of the most crucial components to pulling off these spectacles are the features, and this doesn't just mean stuffing a record up with big-name A-listers, but it means encompassing the gifts of all walks of talent to expand the scope and strengthen your record. And when it comes to Utopia, it uses features better than any other album this year. From Playboi Carti debuting a new voice on Fiend, Drake going unconscious on Meltdown, SZA ascending into another realm on Telekinesis, to Westside Gunn and Tizo Touchdown dropping off show-stopping finales on their respective tracks, along with so many others. The features on Utopia show that Travis is able to curate and channel performances from his collaborators better than nearly any other rapper out right now. So overall, for Utopia pushing Travis Scott to the very limits of his capabilities so far, giving us an experience that pulls from everything that's made him a force in the rap world for a decade and using all of these aspects Thanos style to create not just the ultimate album for him, but the perfect album in this current era in hip-hop by embodying the thrill fans seek, but also the long-standing quality that immortalizes a body of work into becoming a classic. Utopia is without a doubt the album of the year. And there you have it. There is my list of the very best and the utter worst albums to come out in the hip-hop world in 2023. Now let me know, do you agree with my list? Remember, if you don't, that is completely fine. This is just my opinion, so be sure to comment what your best and worst albums of 2023 were in the comments. Now, if you've made it to this point in the video, what are you doing if you're not subscribed? Be sure to smash that like button and stick around for future content because we got a lot more great things coming on the way, including our countdown of the best and worst rappers of 2023. So if you can't wait to find out who the MVP and the worst rapper on the planet are, be sure to subscribe and stick around for that video coming very soon. Thank you for watching. Your support means everything. Mr. F, Fantastic Hip Hop, signing out. Catch you in the next video.